everyone. Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Hope you all are doing well. I am stoked for this session. I've somehow persuaded Colin Zima to come on, aka Peloton handle Drink Zima. We've been Peloton friends for probably about 4 years now, Colin. Tried to catch you a few times and I just gave up on that, like literally 4 years ago, the first ride. Colin is awesome. He's got a great history, everyone. He is a big time data product just guru, was at Google kind of back in the early days, I'd say, founded his own company, got acquired, went into Looker. Literally, probably I would consider you, Colin, a part of the founding team at Looker. Joined in 2014, built Looker, took it into Google. And for the past almost 3 years now, you've been building your own company called Omni, which is great. So we have a lot to cover through all of that. You're also probably one of the best I've seen with product and customers, and want to get your take on some of those pieces as well as you're building the company and some of your own philosophies as you're doing this again with Omni. So just to kick off, we just were talking about this. You are a Series B, 65-person company now with no G&A. Well, I mean, you're technically G&A.
I'm the G&A team.
Yeah, you're the G&A team. And it reminded me, Nolan, of that session we kicked around when Shema from the All In podcast said HR shouldn't exist. But we had some reactions to that, and this kind of reminded me of it. And I'd love just to kick off on that. Was that intentional, Colin? Do you not like G&A? What's the deal?
I mean, thanks for having me first. Excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. No, but I mean, it was very intentional when we started. And it comes from a pretty simple place. It's pretty easy to tell everyone that either you're building the product or you're selling the product. And I think my general philosophy has been kind of like, as in so much as you can do that for as long as you can possibly do that, there's a really positive alignment if everyone is sort of building or selling. Obviously, that's a gross oversimplification of how companies actually work. Like, you need people that are supporting the people everywhere. But my point of view has been, we really want to try to avoid people with half jobs. And it's really difficult because as you're small, there's a lot of half jobs. Like, I get to handle a lot of our finance. So I do all of our customer billing. We post demos on a weekly basis. So I do a little bit of editing of our videos on a weekly basis. And all of these could probably be filled by a person here or a person there. And like, frankly, we will need those people over time. But our general philosophy has been like, let's stretch that as long as we possibly can. And when you feel extreme pain, then we can hire people into these roles. And I think specifically when I think about it kind of vis-a-vis, there's like legal, HR, and finance. And I think they all sort of have tactics associated with them that support the company in really particular ways. And so the question is sort of like, when is there enough work that it is actually a whole person's job? Because I just generally believe that kind of one of the more painful evolutions of a company is when people have to make themselves relevant. And like, I don't say this to sort of be mean to people, but if you have a legal team, you're going to do more legal work. And if you have an HR team, you're going to do more HR work. I'm not exactly sure what that is in terms of like abstract HR work, that is. The philosophy has sort of been like, do it yourself and push it into the orgs as much as possible. So recruiting, I think, is a great example here. I want all my leaders in the given areas to recruit. And if someone comes and immediately is like, I need a recruiter to do my job, it's like, if you have 2 people in your team and you can't find a third person, there's a problem that you probably can't be an effective leader. And obviously there's an amount of that where it's too much of your job. But I think early, the sort of onus is on everyone else to show that they need that person. And the other thing I would say here is like, there's almost certainly stuff that we're doing wrong because of this. Like, I'm pretty sure that the way that we onboard employees is terrible and we don't train people very well at all either. But we also have some of these inherent benefits. 40 out of 60 of us came from Looker. So I know the people that can do certain work. And like, we've had sales reps that are certified to do demos 1 week into their job. We are very benefited by a lot of that experience. And the challenge is sort of like, it is going to change over time. And I think the question is sort of like, how do we manage that and control it?
It's so interesting because I think people who listen to this show will expect Kelly and I to be like, what the hell are you doing? And in fact, I'm going to say the exact opposite. I think that's exactly how you should build it. And there's a couple reasons why. The first is it turns out people learn more when they actually have to do the work. And I've actually said this from the other side, which is HR and recruiters should be in the business. They should be selling. They should be talking to customers. So when you hire those, Colin, I think that's something you should deploy for sure. But inversely, when the early team can actually do the recruiting and the HR work themselves, all of a sudden, like when HR recruiting shows up, they have a lot more empathy for those roles. They don't treat that role like a service function. They treat that role actually like a business owner, an operator. And, recruiting is the perfect example. So I told the story a few times about DoorDash. I was the first recruiter at employee 50. And the only reason they brought me on is because we had like 100 open roles. And it was just like getting overly burdensome, to your point. But what I didn't realize what had happened before then, which was the magic as DoorDash scaled, they're now 12,000 employees. Hiring managers are still expected to source for their own roles. Today, public company, tens of billions in market cap. And if you don't source for your own roles, Tony's going to find out and be like, what the fuck are you doing? And why that is so great is because, yes, like you can figure out what recruiting is, but also every hiring manager, when they first start recruiting, is like, oh, I want like the unicorn who Stanford undergrad, MIT PhD, they were like a co-founder at a Series C company and then it failed. And then all of a sudden you put them on LinkedIn, they're like, oh shit, like that person doesn't exist or they will never respond to my message. I mean, even making somebody like write a coherent outbound message is such good practice. And so I'm curious, Colin, how has your team responded to that? Like, are they down with it or are they complaining to you? Like what's going on inside?
I think it varies. I mean, I think certain organizations internally have been wealthier with pipeline than others. So like our engineering team in particular is 100% Looker and Stitch, which is our CTO came from Stitch. And we have literally a queue of just like outstanding people that we want to work with in the future. And so even the thought of using a recruiter there is kind of comical because it's like we have the next 10 people lined up, hopefully, or have like targets in mind that we're thinking about that we would love to have work with us at some point. I think it's been harder for others, especially just hiring the first of everything is really difficult. So I think it's been painful in certain ways, but I think when pressed, the team has responded to it really well and sort of found ways to make it work, which is sort of the point. Like there are some easy buttons that can solve these things, but when pressed, we're finding that we can go solve them, and we're finding really, really good people when we do it. And I think some of it is the first N people that you hire matter so much for each subsequent person that you're like. I know that everyone says this. Like our company is so heavily built on just work reputation. Like I think people thankfully liked working with me. And so that was the early team. And the early team that we got is just unbelievable people from Looker. Like the people that everyone looks at and it's just like, that's the best person I've ever worked with. And it turns out if you keep hiring that way, the marginal person is easier to hire also because they want to work with that person. And so it's been really important that as we've started to hire like new versions of a person, like we just hired our first person in support and a support leader, and the people are just outstanding. And it's been really important to kind of keep that bar really high, which again, is like, these are all cliched things to say, but, and it's not to say that a recruiter couldn't do that either, but I think making it the leader's problem, like it is their most important problem actually. And so I think in that sense, like we've made it work and we're going to keep making it work.
Yeah. I mean, Nolan, you and I we recorded our, end of year segment, Colin, like 2 hours ago. And one thing we talked about for 2025, I think this is a great example of one of our predictions, Nolan, is like maximizing people's roles and getting in there and contributing and not hiring bodies for body's sake. And like, yeah, we need a person to do this and that and turning into like this office space company. Like that's gone. And it's gone, because one of just efficiencies and the pressure, but also because of the mindset that I think you're seeing here. I think a lot of companies are employing. And you said, Colin, look, no G&A, I'm sure we're screwing things up. Yes, and we also talked about the fact that a lot of people hire, it's not just HR people, it's business leaders, et cetera, that have done it, seen it, and they come, you've done this before, come in and do it, bring your practices. And sometimes that actually can stifle innovation or doing it better or differently. So you actually might be screwing some things up, and you might actually be starting to stumble on doing things better.
Exactly.
Because you don't have a 20-year HR person in there telling you how it's done.
I still know that there's a lot of things that we can go learn from this, like certain problems we just don't know how to handle, and it's nice to have someone that knows how to do these things. But I think in general, like we've seen this, we're starting to talk for our first finance person because we just need help. It's so much easier to have that conversation about expectations when we can say to the person, like, you don't get to come in and hire 3 people on this team. Like, that's not how we're going to do it. You're going to do the work that I, the CEO, am doing that is terrible. And, the point is not that you're doing this forever. Like, I want you to be a CFO also, but it makes that conversation easier about sort of like, no, you don't get to hire a support person for your job because the execs don't have support people. Like, we do it all ourselves. And I'm a big believer that sort of like pain is the wrong word, but it sort of is. Like, what I mean is like, you need to struggle a little bit and do the things that you don't love doing. And it's really interesting because the VCs are constantly telling us, like, you're doing too much work that is a waste of your time. And that probably is somewhat true. Like, it's not a good use of my time to go spend 5 days, like 5 hours, 1 day a month billing customers. We could go hire people to do that. But there's something cultural about doing the dirty work that is, I believe, just like so important to how we build the company. It's been really interesting as we hired more people. Like, another example is I love doing support. Like, I actually enjoy doing customer support. And I think when other people in the company see that, they realize how much we value customer support. And so in some ways, it sort of teaches us what we value and sort of how we do things. And I'm a much bigger believer that, like, Jamie, Chris, and I, the founders, need to do that. Like, we need to suffer almost the most at some of these things to be able to preach that, you have to stretch for support and you have to do things yourself for a while. Like, Chris, I think, manages the most people in the company directly. I think he's got like 18 direct reports. Obviously, that's an anti-pattern, but it's much easier to say, like, you can take 7 if Chris can take 18 than it is to just say, like, we work this other way and you have to deal with it. I would caveat, I only manage 2 people.
Yeah, maybe it's an anti-pattern. I think we are going to start to see like these like, lines of management start to shrink too. We've already started to see, like, Jensen at NVIDIA has 50 direct reports.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes. Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
I think there's just like benefits to doing that, Colin. I think that you might not even realize that are helpful for you to understand and internalize your business, right? I always tell people you don't want to atrophy. Like, I'm doing some interim gig right now and I'm literally like pulling Radford stuff and looking at the, like, you don't want to forget how to do that stuff. That's when you become the suit, right, Nolan? That's when we talked about this segment. That's when you become the empty suit. You can't do that. And so, being close to that for a while, and even when you're not and you're 1,000 people dipping into it, it's really important to understand the intricacies of that business, which help in ways that I'm not even sure we can connect, that might be more subconscious. That's my opinion. Now, back to the G&A. I didn't mean that we should never hire G&A. And this isn't for job security. I do think that great legal, finance, and people leaders can be actually very helpful. What I want to unpack for you before we move on to the next topic, because I think this is really interesting for our audience, because you're a serial entrepreneur, you're a founder, you think very differently. When you hire that people leader, what do you want? Who do you work with? What do you talk about? Like, what's in your mind, at least right now?
Yeah, it's actually funny because Jamie and I have been talking about this because we're sort of expecting to need to do this. I think every single person on the exec team needs to work for the business, not for their function. And that is probably the most important thing to me. So, like, I have advocated for us hiring an HR leader that we do not give an HR title to, for example. And I get that a lot of this is sort of like make believe, but the reason that you're doing it, like for me, when you have these really, really tight classifications, you're sort of saying like, you're in charge of people, so I need you doing people stuff. Really, I want sort of everyone at that level thinking about just like how to make the business more successful. And certainly like the salesperson is going to do that by selling more, but there are people problems underneath that. And I think if you just try to matrix and say like, you're in charge of people, and like, I think this is sort of obvious. It's just like the people person can't carry culture. The founders are going to do that. So like they can support, but to me, that's almost like an operations role. Like, how do you facilitate the founders pushing culture and doing things like that? And certainly like office is another example of this. Like that's almost an operations function, though it's like a people function also. So I think that's a little bit of the reframing, is sort of like, how does it look more like a business role than like a vertical or sort of like a specialization? And I, that's at least what I want to figure out. So it's like, I think this is probably something that founders just say in general because it's sort of like, it sounds foundery as I say it. But I would love to figure out sort of like an honest way to do this, because that's what I want. Is I don't want someone that thinks about it from like, we need to standardize salaries across the company, because that's not the point. The point isn't standards. The point is make the company operate better. So maybe that's standards, but like the underlying reason for it can't be the standard. It needs to be, I want the company to operate better in some way. Like I want it to be more fair. I want to retain talent better. And so like, that's the slight reframing on it. There's obviously some protection that we need from like a legal standpoint, and, there's stuff like that too. But that's the sort of slight reframing that I think we have, especially around the kind of the HR stuff.
Yeah. Let me also just pull the thread quickly on contractors and non-FTEs. So you guys have raised a couple rounds of financing. I'm assuming you're using outside counsel to help you with those financing rounds.
Yes, exactly.
And then I'm also assuming you're using something like Pilot or something like that to like help you close the books.
Really? Yep.
Exactly. And then you're also using something probably like Gusto or something like that. Ripple, exactly, for HR stuff. So this is the other thing that's going on, is that tech is getting so good that for early stage companies, you don't need a FTE to run this stuff. The founder, again, it's a couple hours a month, can press a few buttons and basically have all this shit done, or have like amazing access to outside counsel like you do with probably like one of the best law firms. And that's, I think, Kelly, part of like the 2025 predictions that you and I were making. You said, I think there's going to be a lot more contractors. And I tend to agree. So Colin, how are you thinking about that? Like when you think about contractor versus FTE, is that something that you guys are thinking about right now when you guys are building the plan for 2025?
I mean, a little bit. We haven't used contractors too much, but again, like I think it comes back to, is it a full-time job? And if it's not, we want the person to be a contractor until we think that we have, an entire year's worth of work for that person every year. So I think that's what it comes down to. I couldn't agree more on the sort of HR side. Like I think we have employees in 12 states and 3 countries right now, and it is shockingly easy to do. Like we hired someone in Canada and just didn't even think about it. It's just sort of like, yeah, of course we can hire someone in Canada. And I'm sure not that many years ago, that was very, very difficult. And there's still bumps and, like it's not the smoothest thing, but just the fact that it's even possible, like the idea of running payroll is a really funny one to me because we just don't even ever look at it. It's just like people get paid. And like the idea of that I would go look at it, it's just like, I mean, I hope their salaries are punched in correctly. But other than that, like it just sort of goes. So like, yeah, the systems have gotten very, very good.
Okay, so this was on my list, and I'm just gonna shove it in here because you brought it up. I wanted to get your hot take on your point of view on in office versus remote and all of that, and then you said you were spread across all these places. So, through deductive reason, I went to how you feel about that, but would love your take on that, Colin.
I think this might be an unpopular take, which is like, I think everyone has a strong opinion on both sides. They're either like, oh, remote is the future or in office is the future, and you have to do one or the other. We are sort of like the weakest opinioned on both sides, which is we have a bunch of offices and people go in sometimes. Like I probably am guilty of not going in enough, even though it's very, very close to my house. And then we have remote people everywhere. And it's even interesting. We have some leaders that are building almost entirely in-person teams and others that are just completely remote. And I have given people complete flexibility to do this. Now, again, we have a couple advantages. A lot of folks at previous companies that we've worked with, so we know their work quality really, really well. We're also skewing towards very, very senior employees in general. Like I would say our average engineer has 10 to 20 years of experience. And so I think we've gotten some advantages. It might bite us. I don't really know what else to say because we are pretty opinionless. And I have been a little bit probably mean, for lack of a better word, about having a non-premium office, because if we average 2.5 days a week, then we get, half the quality of an office that we would get, which is a tough balance also. But I think other than just like the general economics of double paying for, remote stuff and offsites and getting people in the office, I want people to be productive and I sort of trust them to do good work. And I think there's good reasons to be in office and a remote and around. Like if we can hire a great person in SF, they get a lot of context and they get to be around me and the team, and that's great. And if they're not here, then we get to hire the best people in the whole world anywhere that they are, and they get to do good work there. And so we're sort of trying to have it both ways. The CEO of Rome says something that I think really I strongly agree with, which is like every successful company is eventually remote. You will eventually hire people everywhere, and we are planning to be successful. So we're just going to go hire people everywhere, and we're going to have to get good at coordination.
Yeah. Never heard the answer. I like it.
It's a very unpopular answer amongst founders because it feels like founders are forced to take a side. And I love that you're just like, well, like this is the way we're doing it now. And the thing I think that underpins all of it is your point exactly of the majority of your company you have like worked with in the past, or somebody has worked with them. And so the positive there is trust is built in, right? We know this person's work quality. We trust them. I think the downside actually is, how do you think about this homogenous culture? I think there's two pieces to the homogeny. One is that you guys are just like, we all know each other. We're all homies, which like maybe we're not thinking as first principles. I think the other downside is like, well, what happens as we start to scale and people who aren't part of this clique, how do they break in, especially we don't really have an opinion on how this thing is run. And so comms is usually like fucked up in that situation. How are you thinking about that?
It's a good question. It's like, I think it is sort of going to slowly evolve is sort of my, like, this sounds very non-first principles because it's just like, we're going to see what happens and we're going to react to it is like very much the way that I think that we think about things, which is we have a lot of these embedded advantages of people that know each other and like work well together. And to your point, like we trust people a lot. The value that we have, because we just did the values exercise, of course, is like trust and expect, which is like, we will trust you, but we expect a lot from you. Like the example that I love to give, and I've done this in recruiting a bunch of times, is I coach my daughter's soccer team at 4:00 on Thursdays. And I like to get on the Peloton at like 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon with some frequency. Like those don't sound like people that work hard, But like when it comes down to it, I just don't really care because like that's not the point. Like I'm not pretending to work hard. I'm trying to do good work and live my life on the side. And I feel like that's kind of the level of maturity that I want to handle the employee base with. I do think that because we are less in office and more remote, you naturally could lean towards more of a mercenary style of culture, which is, like people that are there because it's going well and because the job is good and because they're paid well. And that's kind of stuff that we have to watch and deal with. And like that's probably the part underneath it all that concerns me a little bit. Like you can't build the cult the same way. And like Looker had this advantage of being in Santa Cruz and like isolated. And if you look at companies that build in, I don't want to call Santa Cruz a second tier city, but like an isolated place, you can build much more of like a mind meld with the employees where there's more of a community and things like that. And we don't have a lot of those advantages. So I think that we'll just attract different types of employees that want different things. And my belief is sort of like, obviously you're sort of seeing this, like, it's not a central planning thing. We need to go see what we're doing well and fix it if it's not working. And so if a lot of that is like training and group exercise and things like that, we have to go do that stuff. But, we're just going to go and see what happens.
Yeah, you're going to earn the right to solve the problem, which I totally agree with. Talk to me a bit about the recruiting piece right now. So it feels like the talent war is starting to heat back up.
Yep.
You had mentioned a lot of these employees are coming out of Looker. Look, Looker's Google now. Like they probably get paid pretty well.
Yep.
Your Series B, I remember like when I went to DoorDash at Series B, is like my salary took a hit. It was kind of a pain in the ass, especially as I've gotten more senior, like, and I have kids now too. My expectation for what like I need to be paid has gotten higher. But like, how do you think about that? Because I'm talking to a lot of founders right now, early stage founders who are like, well, like they have to take a pay cut to come here. And I'm like, can you really hire senior people at the velocity that you're hiring them with those expectations?
I think the reality is you're never going to compete with Fang on total comp. Like the expected value of total comp at Fang is going to beat you no matter what. So if that's your strategy, you're doomed. I actually think this ties back to the previous stuff that we were talking about around like the way that we trust people at work and sort of the flexibility to live your life and do good work, which is I am going to offer you a place where, like you don't have to do perf the same way and you can just go to work and be productive and like think about making the business better and you'll be treated like an adult and compensated pretty well. And so like, again, I think it's going to attract certain types of people. Like I think the reason that we've attracted so many Looker folks or former Looker folks, because a lot of these folks had jobs in between too, is it's a group of people that really like working together and sort of enjoy just, leaders that respect them and don't like, I think no one would call me someone who's not in the details. So like I pay a lot of micro detail attention to what people are doing, but I sort of respect people to make good decisions and sort of do great work. And, if someone is gone for 3 days because they want to go ski or something, I think that's part of life and that's a great thing. And so like, I think there's aspects of this where people want a lot of meaning from their work. Like they want to do good work. A lot of people want to feel like the work that they are doing is actually sort of moving the ball forward. And we've even seen this with Google people is there's a lot of people that want to be kind of pseudo retired there. And I respect that. Like if you want to go collect a paycheck and sort of not think about work, I do think there's a lot of jobs at Fang that are like that. I think that we're hiring a lot of people that are actually willing to take a pay cut because they want to kind of be obsessed with end users and they want to spend 40 hours or 60 hours a week doing things that actually matter and feel like they matter. And so we need to be able to pitch a lot of that. And I think that's the evolution of like a seed, you're pitching the dream, a B, or like in the middle, you're pitching some stability and some of the dream. And then at the Fang, you're like, it's a money thing. And like, I guess you could pitch the scale or something like that. So we're in the middle, but I just want to make it a great place to work. And I think that that's a big enough advantage that you can talk to Fangs about that pretty easily.
Yeah. Colin, Nolan often accuses me of living in a utopia, describing these like wonderful scenarios, which I think you're kind of describing. At least I took it that way. Like I want to go work there. Like
yeah, he seems like a real person, like not one of these like crazy founders that we normally talk to.
Totally. I mean, at least at the moment, but I have a question though, Colin. Like this sounds great. What happens, you don't have G&A, people can kind of do whatever. How do you tell if someone's not doing good work? And what do you do? Like, how does it work at Omni?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to trust leaders to make good decisions there, honestly. Like in certain areas, it's really simple. Like in sales, you're either hitting numbers or you're not. We sort of have a different problem where like everyone is between 120% and 200% of quota. So like it's a happy place right now. I mean, again, I think one of these advantages is just like when you hire really good people, you don't need to micromanage them the same way. Like we need to make sure that we're doing work a certain way. So like one of these examples on the engineering side is we demo every single Friday. Like I clip it up on YouTube and we post 10 videos of stuff that we are working on every single Friday. So like there are these little accountability hooks, I think, in everything that we're doing, that where we can see sort of the pace that everyone is operating at. And we can kind of look around and say, like, hey, is everyone pulling along here? Great, like we're in good shape. Honestly, we haven't had to deal with that problem yet, which is one of the advantages is like if I worked with an engineer for Looker at 8 years and I know they're productive, I don't really need to look at their pull requests every day to know if they're being productive. Like I need to know if they're engaged at work and want to be here. But I know that they're a good decision maker and they can write good code and they understand the problems. So like we're gonna have to figure out frameworks for this over time. But it's like I joked about sort of performance reviews. We do a performance review process. It's like 2 paragraphs. It's supposed to take an hour and we do it once a year. And like you get some feedback over like, hey, you're doing great, or hey, commit more. So I don't know. Again, not rocket science, but it's just like you can kind of look around and see.
But my takeaway there, like if I was in a role or whatnot, I'd employ immediately is you've essentially like the demo example is a great example. You have woven into the flow of your business pretty much like mini performance management milestones. Like that Friday demo thing is a thing. It's not like it's a test or anything, but it's real obvious if, and a lot of companies don't operate that way. So they have to kind of put in these, heavier processes. Like that's very unique, I think.
And I would say this is also another attribute of everyone's sort of writing code or selling the product. Like I don't have a lot of support staff to review. I will say I'm probably very obnoxious to the leaders when they have people. Like we've just hired a couple of them and I poke them all the time. Let's make sure we understand what these people are doing and that they have really clear responsibilities, because I can evaluate everyone else in the company really easily. Like sales reps is self-evaluating essentially. And so, yeah, I think celebrating the progress is really valuable, because I don't think about the Friday demos as performance reviews at all. I think about it as sort of the lifeblood of the company and celebrating our progress. But again, we do 52 demos a year. So you get a lot of opportunities to get in front of the company too.
Yeah. So it's interesting on the Friday thing. So at Carta, we had this thing called show and tell. And we basically did the exact same thing. And when I first got there, I was like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, why are we like literally an engineer? This is at 300 people is pulling up terminal and showing me the code. I'm like, my eyes are fucking bleeding right now. Like, what is happening here? But once we started to dial it in a little bit more, what we found is that it's such a great way to share information broadly. Cart at that point in time had 9 offices across 3 countries. And you could say whatever you want about like remote or whatever, or like it didn't matter if you're working from home, like you're not all in the same place. To your point around once you're a successful company, it's just a great way to like share information, and then it's an accountability function as well. Really quickly on the sales reps thing, I think one of the things you need to add to your hiring plan for next year is like sales ops to like dial in those.
We just hired our first one. But again, like I was sort of just like torturing our VP of sales, and he was finally just okay, now I can come to you and I can say I literally have a full-time job here and it's completely unambiguous. And that like then it's really easy to be like, sure, yes.
Extreme pain.
Yeah, I mean Lambert from Looker has been working with us and he's like, you should have hired this person 12 months ago. And it's like, no, I'm going to torture everyone and then it'll be obvious that we need the person.
Yeah, including your revenue. Okay, so that's interesting. Talk to me about like I want to know more about for recruiting for non-network people, right? What does that process look like? And like, what is like the unique Omni thing that you call in a CEO? You're like, this has to be done for like every one of our hires that I really care about.
God, I don't think we really have a thing, which is kind of crazy, actually. I think we probably only posted 6 or 7 jobs total out of the 65 people. So we haven't done a lot of just post a job, come work with us. I mean, we try to talk, we do all the same stuff. Like we try to have one of the founders talk to them. Though again, this is going to sound funny, but I think we've had a couple of people that didn't talk to one of the founders because we weren't, everyone must talk to the founder, which I'm sure is, again, like deeply unpopular. So like, I don't think that we have any sort of magic to it. I sort of mostly trust people to make good decisions. And I go ask people, the types of people that they're talking to. And we try to have really clear measures of success for the jobs. But I don't need to micromanage our marketing leaders, BDRs. Like I trust them. And then we can see whether they're getting ramped and productive. And that's probably a combination of whether they're hiring well and themselves. So I don't know. I have a very like defeatist point of view, which is I've always found it kind of weird when you're interviewing like a PM from Google at your startup, and the ability to turn around and just be like, I don't know if this person meets the bar. It's like you can see on their resume they've met the bar at a bunch of places that are like comparably aggressive with their talent bars. And then the idea that you can actually figure out in like a 30-minute conversation that whether they're going to be competent or not seems kind of ridiculous to me. I feel like so much of it is just like culture fit and whether they actually want the job. Like I'm a huge believer that just caring kind of can overshadow everything. But I think more like sort of an index investor with talent probably than most people do, which is a weird thing to say. But I don't know. I think lots of people can be really, really effective.
Yeah. The thing I'm learning from this conversation is, which is like such an obvious learning that all of us know, but that we don't hear much from founders, is I hire really great leaders that do great work. We build trust, and then I get out of their way when they go run their organization because that trust is established. Now, it doesn't mean you're like completely gone from the picture.
Yeah, I don't know if any of them would say I'm out of their way, but in the day-to-day, I really am.
I'd love to shift a little bit, Colin, to Looker, M&A, Google. Like we talk a lot about M&A obviously here, but like in a visceral way that's personal to you, pretty much like a founder mentality in a company. I mean, I was there as well for a bit, and it's some of the most like passionate, smartest, like caring humans ever. I mean, it was so like potent, that culture. And we went into cloud, and I just, again, as a part of that kind of founding team in many ways, and a founder, how did that process go for you? Like, I don't think you and I've ever talked about this. Like, how did you feel about that? And
I had higher expectations, which I think is like every single person in every acquisition ever thinks it's going to be slightly different for them, and they're wrong every single time. I do think that I was sort of like dissuaded of that much more quickly. And so I was just sort of like, let's take care of this and make sure that it works well and go. I think the story I always tell is I think there are these micro cultural things where, like Google and Looker actually seem somewhat aligned culturally. Like it's sort of like a really positive, like do great work, a little bit nerdy maybe. But the example I always come back to that really sort of beat me down very quickly, and I wouldn't have expected it, was at Looker, every meeting starts on time. It was a sales-driven culture. We started meetings at 9. At Google, every meeting starts 7 minutes late, maybe 5 minutes late if you're lucky. Post-acquisition for 6 months, on every single call that was a mix of Lookers and Google people, there would be 5 minutes of Looker people by themselves at the start of the call, given an opportunity to essentially reminisce about, like, where is the other team? Don't we wish it was just the Looker way again? And then the Google people would get on and you'd like merge them together. And it sort of just emphasizes how important like the apparently small things are from a cultural perspective and how much of an impact they can have, because every single person got to feel that like 3 or 4 times a day. And it was one of those things that just bothered me enormously that I wouldn't have thought mattered, but I think sort of like emphasized how hard it is to actually integrate a company. And then I think the other thing is just like, it is so obvious how different life is when you have to fight for your survival versus like having the shelter of a parent to take care of you. And I don't think there's a way to replicate that inside big companies without a really, really focused management structure that sort of drives that. And Amazon seems like the canonical example. Like, they create these teams, they act like companies. There's no sort of parent over top of them. They're just these little pods that are essentially small companies. And I think I wasn't quite ready for sort of like the political depth of Google vis-a-vis sort of like, just go make revenue and make a great product that we were doing at Looker. And that was, I think, a very interesting experience for me that I don't really want to go back to.
God, the late for meeting thing is such a visceral example for me. You just named something that drives me absolutely crazy that I actually haven't been able to like put a finger on. It is like the ultimate sign of disrespect when you're just consistently late.
And some people just don't think that. Like, like, I hate to call it my wife, but like, she's late to stuff and it bothers me. And I'm an on-time person.
My mom too.
But like, you can go build a company around that. Like, Google is consistently 7 minutes late, and it's like, we're shuffling conference rooms, meetings go over. Like, our point of view at Looker was like, we're hosting customer meetings. They start on the hour at the time. It's just like, it was a cultural thing. Like, if someone just showed up late to an interview at Looker, that would have been a knock in like a way that would have been like, hey, this isn't a cultural match. And then you had to sort of blend these things together. And it's like, I think articulating sort of those types of styles and how they interact and mesh, I think I just undervalued how important those little things at the margin are about how people act.
Yeah, and I would offer it's not just about acquisitions, right? This is culturally in companies as well. And yes, it's annoying when people are, I don't like it either, when people are late. However, the bigger like point for me on that, it wasn't the Google people being late. It was every time that happened, which was multiple times per day, you gave 5 to 8 lookers an opportunity to commiserate further and dig in, which made the integration culturally harder. Like that is kind of the big, and that's why people are like, oh, that's tactical, that's small. Like, fuck that, that's not tactical. You add up all these tactical things, you have a big strategy problem, and you got to connect those things. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Colin, this was awesome as always. Good seeing you, and y'all are doing great things over at Omni. So we're gonna follow you. Thank you for spending some time.
Yeah, Colin, this was a blast. And by the way, I definitely think you should send this episode to future recruits because like describing your culture, like I hear this and I'm like, oh my God, this founder is an adult. And I think that that's pretty rare in tech.
And you attended a GNA. I mean, it's very diverse now as far as who listens, but you spent an hour of your time attending a GNA
New pool
podcast. So it's incredible. We're turning you. All right. Thank you both very much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, Colin.
It was so much fun.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.